Number 1.
Kyla Gabrielle Porter was a beautiful, fun-loving, and free-spirited 19-year-old girl from Newport Richey, Florida. She loved her family, her sister Lynn's children, and most of all, hanging out with her friends. One night in 2008, Porter reportedly attended a party and placed a phone call to her sister, whom she had been staying with at the time, saying she would be on her way home within an hour. She never arrived home and has never been seen or heard from since. Porter had recently moved back to Florida after having been living in Atlanta, Georgia with her boyfriend, who had been jailed on drug charges. She wanted to start a new life and was finding her way, navigating through all of the normal things a young woman in her situation may happen to go through. This was something her mother, Teresa Arons, spoke about in various interviews over the years. Now 61 years old, she has never given up the fight in searching for her precious daughter. Porter had been living at her sister Lynn's house on Blossom Lake Drive in Holiday, Florida, helping her watch her children when her sister would go to work at a local pizza parlor. Like most teenagers, she also wanted to have an active social life and found her way to many local parties in the area. Porter had supposedly gone to a party on February 15, 2008, though the location of the party remains a mystery. Speculation and rumor have led investigators to believe she may have been in Moon Lake, an area about 15 miles from her home, but those rumors have not been confirmed. She claimed she was with a friend who, when later contacted by Arons, claimed she hadn't seen Porter for weeks. The friend then got irritated with Arons' questions and hung up the phone. Porter's family believes she has been met with foul play and did not leave on her own accord due to the fact that she left behind her ID, purse, and winter clothing. Her family states that she has left home for days on end in the past, but always made an effort to keep in close contact with them. There are no suspects named in her case, and no witnesses have come forward. Porter's story was portrayed on an episode of A&E's hit series Psychic Kids, Season 3, Episode 2, where 3 teens gave accounts of what they saw in their psychic visions had happened to her. So far, those leads have seemingly gone unresolved. No answers have been found regarding her disappearance or whereabouts. She is known to have friends in the Newport Richey area, as well as Palm Harbor. Porter was suffering from depression when she went missing over the status of her relationship with her boyfriend, and she had also been clinically diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. Kyla Porter has perfectly straight teeth, is 5'4", and weighed 125 pounds at the time she went missing. She has 2 star tattoos on either side of her upper chest, one red, one blue, a fairy tattoo on her back right shoulder, and a lower back tattoo of 2 skulls within a heart and flames with the word unbreakable written underneath. She has pierced ears and a nose ring. Her date of birth is October 27, 1989, and she went missing from Holiday, Florida. If you have any information as to the whereabouts of Kyla Porter or information on this case, please contact the Pasco County Sheriff's Department at 1-800-854-2862 and reference case number 08-13138.
Number 2.
Joyce Lepage, a 21-year-old junior taking summer classes at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, was last seen alive on the evening of July 22, 1971, when friends dropped her off at her apartment. A tall young woman at 5'9", she was described as attractive and athletic-looking, with long, light brown hair. Police would later find her abandoned car parked 4 blocks away from her off-campus apartment on Maiden Lane. Her shoes and purse minus identification and keys were found inside her car. Already a licensed private pilot, Lepage had also been taking skydiving lessons, with her first parachute jump scheduled for the next day, but she never made it to the lesson, nor to any of her university classes. She had no reason to take off and was planning to come down for the Water Follies boat races that coming weekend, said her brother, Bruce Lepage. She just never showed up. As she had taken no belongings and had contacted no friends or relatives, foul play was immediately suspected in her disappearance. A neighbor reported seeing her getting into a car with two unknown men on the morning of the 23rd, and a psychic claimed that he had seen her boarding a plane bound for Argentina with a Latin boyfriend in a vision, but none of these leads panned out and were eventually discarded. Bruce said his sister had many admirers. "I just know there were a lot of guys who would have loved to have dated her," he said. This could very well be a person she turned down. Her long-distance boyfriend living in South Africa was also notified of her disappearance, but she wasn't with him, and he hadn't heard from her. 9 months later, in April 1972, a teenager searching for gemstones along a dry creek bed found Lepage's skeletal remains, hidden by dense brush at the bottom of a deep ravine in Wawawai Canyon, 10 miles southwest of Pullman. This site was remote, accessible only via a primitive gravel road. Her nude body was wrapped in a large piece of green shag carpet which had earlier been reported missing from Stevens Hall, a women's dormitory on the WSU campus, which in the summer of 1971 was uninhabited and under renovation. According to friends and described in letters sent to her overseas boyfriend, Lepage enjoyed visiting the old, empty building and would often go there to read, write, play the dorm's baby grand piano, and occasionally spend the night in the rooms. She would slip up there. She had a window she could slide open and slip inside. She would go in there and do her writing, her brother Bruce said. Clearly she was entering the hall, going in and out of there, said retired WSU Police Sergeant Don Maupin. And it wouldn't be hard for someone else to do the same thing, particularly if they're observing her. Some of her friends knew she was going into Stevens Hall. In fact, the people who dropped her off said, "You've got to quit doing that. It's dangerous, and besides that you're going to get in trouble." Rosie Lord, who worked as a custodian for the university, said she believed Lepage probably attended a party at Stevens on the night of her disappearance because there were pizza boxes and drug paraphernalia spread around when her cleaning crew arrived the next morning. This was also when the 52x62 chunk of carpet was noted missing from the front foyer. A friend mentioned that Lepage had planned on visiting the hall on the evening of her disappearance. However, no one ever verified her presence at a party that night. Campus lore claims that bloodstains were found in room 24 of the dormitory, but I was unable to confirm this story officially anywhere, and it appears to be an urban legend. However, according to Maupin, there's little doubt that Stevens Hall is where the stabbing took place because she was stabbed multiple times and she was removed from the hall later on. A FBI forensic analysis of her remains found 3 areas of cuts to her ribs, which were determined to be knife wounds and the cause of her death. Based on the evidence, police believed she had been stabbed to death at Stevens Hall, wrapped in the carpet, and transported to the ravine. She was also found wrapped in 2 military blankets and bound with rope. She was wrapped in a blanket first, and then the carpet, Sheriff Myers said. Lepage was not reported missing for 10 days, and it was some time after that before police learned she liked to frequent the residence hall. As time went on, the nature of the case created jurisdictional complexities. Pullman police investigated the missing persons case, WSU investigated the stolen carpet, and the Whitman County Sheriff would eventually be put in charge of the homicide investigation. This required assembling reports from multiple agencies, and it is unclear how long it took for the investigation to connect the remains to the missing carpet report from Stevens Hall. That makes it difficult to piece together, today, what WSU did, what Whitman County did, Myers said. In 2012, a major suspect living in Las Vegas was re-interviewed and passed a polygraph test, eliminating him from the suspect pool. He was interviewed immediately after Joyce disappeared and again after the body was found, but he'd never taken a polygraph, Myers said. He hadn't been contacted again since about 1972. We met with him and said here's how he could help. He was very cooperative and passed a polygraph. I'm confident at this point that we can focus on other avenues. That's a big change in the investigation in terms of our focus. In 2014, evidence was resubmitted to the Washington State Crime Lab for forensic analysis without result. Most recently, attempts were made to track down people in Lepage's circle of friends and acquaintances, but the case remains cold. It would be nice to bring this to a logical conclusion and hold someone responsible, said WSU police officer Jeff Olmsted, who inherited the Lepage case after Sergeant Maupin retired. I think that's the ultimate goal for the Lepage family and for all the officers who investigated this over the years. My worst fear is what if we were never even close? What if it was someone who slipped through the cracks, who was never identified or interviewed by the early investigators? Over the years, some investigators pondered the likelihood of Ted Bundy being involved, based on the fact that the crime took place in Washington state near a college campus, and that Lepage was an attractive young woman with long brown hair parted in the middle. Profile-wise, she did fit the description of Bundy's victims, Maupin said. Some reports indicated that a yellow VW Bug was seen on campus. Others said an unknown person matching Bundy's description was seen at the time of the disappearance. However, there's no real evidence he was involved or in the area, said Myers, and Bundy was probably only suggested as other leads went cold. Conflictingly, in 1989 then Sheriff Steve Thompson claimed that there were certain similarities between this case and others that brought us to Bundy, and we later placed him in this area at about that time. According to the Seattle Police Department's timeline, in July 1971 Bundy was attending summer school at the University of Washington, in a relationship with his long-term girlfriend Liz Klopfer, and working as a delivery driver for Pedline Medical Instrument Supply Company in Seattle. Pullman, Washington is about a 5-hour drive from Seattle. While the connection was tenuous at best, the Whitman County Sheriff's Office did furnish King County Detective Robert Keppel with case information before his pre-execution interview with Ted Bundy in 1989. Keppel mentioned Lepage briefly, but Bundy neither confirmed nor specifically denied the murder, perhaps because Keppel did not phrase the inquiry as a question. The following is an excerpt from Bundy's confession to Keppel in January 1989. RK, I guess what I need then, I want to eliminate any suggestions of, rather than me throwing out stuff for you to say, you know, this is what we need to talk about or not, like the August 2nd, if there's only 11, then that's fine. I don't want to do any guesswork. I mean, I've got girls like in 1971 at WSU that's been murdered that I'm curious about. TB, yeah, I can tell you, yeah, we can do it that way, if you'd like to. And maybe in some ways that's easier. I can tell you what, that's, you know, what I'm not involved in. You know, if you have a list of that type in your head. RK, there's a gal in 1971, Thurston County. TB, no. RK, not that far back. Nothing that far back? TB, 1972. TB, I have no hesitation about talking about things that I have done, no hesitation about telling you about what I haven't done. Okay. So if I tell you something, I may not tell you something, I might not tell you something right now, or every single detail right now, but if I tell you something, you can rely on it. And when I say, yes, I did it or no, I didn't do something, that's the way it is. At WSU, Police Sergeant Maupin worked the Lepage case for virtually his entire 26-year career. I don't want to rule anybody completely out, Myers said. But my personal opinion is no. It wasn't Ted Bundy. My gut feeling is this was someone she knew, he said. Today Joyce Lepage's murder remains the oldest active unsolved case in Whitman County, Washington. The sheriff's office still will not release her file to the public, citing an ongoing, open investigation. Her brother still holds out hope that it will be solved. As of November 2018, he's offering a $100,000 reward to anyone with information that helps lead to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. In a way, it sounds foolish to do a reward at this time. If there was going to be one, it might have helped if it was done earlier on. But I guess I don't care, Bruce said. She was a very friendly, outgoing girl, said her brother. She was a profuse writer. If she were still around, I think she'd have been a high school or college English professor. Joyce had a great future ahead of her. Her life was cut off too soon. I'm not giving up. No reason to give up. Like I said, I would like justice out of this, and if the individual is still alive, I'll keep chasing him. The only reason Ted Bundy has ever been attributed to this crime is because the victim was an attractive young woman, and it occurred near a college campus during a time period when he lived in the same state. But if you look at the case objectively, very little actually ties Bundy to this murder besides the basic victim profile and general location. The time frame of summer 1971 is outside Bundy's known window of criminal activity. In all of his later confessions to Dr. Dorothy Lewis, Seattle Detective Bob Keppel, and FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier, Bundy never admitted to any murders before 1973, or possibly 1972. According to his final conversation with Keppel. According to Bundy, around 1971 he may have attacked some women in Seattle, but chickened out and ran away rather than killing them. Keppel briefly mentioned the Lepage case during his final interview with the killer in January 1989. Bundy didn't answer yes or no directly, but by my interpretation of the transcript, he seemed to deny it, albeit in a circuitous way. He also indicated that 1971 was too early for him to have committed any murders, and if he denied responsibility, he was telling the truth. While Bundy was indeed a habitual liar, so far his deathbed confessions and denials have panned out as truthful, including the burial location of Deborah Kent and the denial of the Kathy Devine murder. The location is also unusual for an early Bundy murder. Bundy's earliest known attacks occurred quite close to his residence in Seattle's University District, usually just blocks away. This way he was able to stalk his victims, probably peeping into their windows and learning their routines. This was easy for him to do, as he was essentially their neighbor and felt comfortable roaming about the neighborhood. In her interview with police, his friend Mary Lynn Chino said she had seen Bundy doing just that late at night. As he became more confident, he began to travel further away from his home base in search of victims. If his pseudo-confession to Stephen Mitchell is to be believed, Bundy traveled to Corvallis, Oregon for the Parks abduction specifically to throw law enforcement off his trail after he had already committed 4 attacks within an hour's drive of Seattle. In Utah and Florida as well, he initially stayed close to his residence in Tallahassee, not straying further than a few blocks to find his victims. Later he would travel further away, from Utah to Colorado and to Lake City from Tallahassee. This is likely because, as when he was first starting out, he felt more comfortable staying close to home and in familiar surroundings. Later he would purposefully travel from his home base as a way to avoid heat from nearby police activity, as well as to throw law enforcement off. Therefore, it's odd to consider the Lepage murder, which happened 5 hours away from his residence in Seattle, as a very early, possibly even first Bundy murder. Based on his known activity, it would make more sense for an early murder to take place close to home, which in 1971 would have been the University District in Seattle. The murder weapon is also a major departure from Bundy's usual modus operandi. Aside from the final murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, who may or may not have had her throat cut, Bundy never used a knife to kill. None of the discovered bodies or bones attributed to Bundy ever had any apparent stab wounds. He also never confessed to using a knife on any of his victims. To the contrary, in his confessions to Special Agent Bill Hagmaier, Bundy spoke about how he preferred strangling incapacitated women, watching their last breath, and the godlike power it lent him. The killer also said that his first victim, in 1973, was manually strangled with his bare hands, but found that too difficult, later switching to a ligature. Therefore, the MO of this stabbing homicide makes little sense when compared with Bundy's usual method. Knowing whether or not Lepage was sexually assaulted would be a clue about her killer. Unfortunately, that's impossible to determine due to the decomposed condition of her remains when she was found. If there was no evidence of rape, this would point away from Bundy as the perpetrator, as he nearly always raped his victims when he had time to do so. Finally, the disposal method of her body is also unlike Bundy. While he was known to leave remains in rural areas, he never wrapped bodies in blankets. He was partial to revisiting his victims' bodies for several weeks after their death, when he didn't bury them, and wrapping them in blankets bound with rope wouldn't lend itself to such necrophilic activity. In my layman's opinion, there are two possible theories of the crime in this case, neither of which involve Ted Bundy. My initial thought is that whoever murdered Lepage was probably stalking her for some time, learning her routine and watching her enter Stevens Hall. He would have been familiar with the campus and known that she was likely alone and vulnerable inside, possibly even sleeping without the benefit of locked doors and windows. He could have been a jealous suitor seeking revenge from rejection. Another possibility is that there was indeed a party at Stevens that night, which Lepage attended. Perhaps she rejected a man's sexual advances, saying she had a boyfriend overseas, then he became angry, lost control under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and stabbed her to death. Both of those scenarios seem far more likely than Ted Bundy traveling 5 hours, following a stranger to an abandoned dormitory, sneaking in after her, and stabbing her to death. For all of these reasons, I think it's unlikely that Ted Bundy murdered Joyce Lepage. Without the benefit of DNA evidence, it seems unclear whether any ever existed, and barring a confession, sadly this case may never be solved.
Number 3.
Shemika Cosey disappeared at the age of 16 on December 29, 2008. The teen girl lived with her mother in Berkeley, Missouri at the time of her disappearance. Days before she vanished, Shemika celebrated Christmas with her family. Since she was on a break from school, Shemika decided to spend the night of December 28 with her aunt and cousins at her aunt's house on Napier St. She was last seen at the house around 1:30 a.m. Her aunt and cousins awoke the next morning around 8:30 a.m. to discover that Shemika was gone. She has never been seen or heard from again. Police were called shortly after Shemika's family noticed that she was missing. When the police showed up at her aunt's house, they reportedly did not find any signs of a break-in, but they did notice that there was a door left unlocked. Police quickly came to the belief that Shemika left on her own accord, and as a result, they reportedly did not search for her. Shemika's mother has acknowledged that it is likely that Shemika did leave the house voluntarily, but she believes that she intended to return. Shemika left behind her overnight bag and many other personal belongings. Her family members do not believe that she would voluntarily leave home and drop out of touch. Before Shemika's disappearance, her mother learned that Shemika had been using a fake ID to get into local nightclubs. It is possible that Shemika left her aunt's house that evening to go to a club, but her family believes she intended to return to her aunt's house before anyone noticed she was gone. Still, Police labeled Shemika as a runaway, and her case maintains that label today. Years later, Shemika's mother was packing up some belongings when she stumbled upon a notebook that Shemika had used to pass notes with a friend at school. In one of the notes, Shemika wrote about a boyfriend she thought might have gotten her pregnant. She also indicated that a relationship with said boyfriend had turned sour. In an entry, dated just months before her disappearance, Shemika wrote, "I can't allow him to feel like he got power over me." Shemika's mother turned the notebook over to police, and the boyfriend was subsequently interviewed, but no reported leads or clues were found. Shemika remains missing today. Her family fears she may have fallen victim to trafficking. If you have any information that could lead to Shemika's whereabouts, please call 314-400-3847 to submit an anonymous tip.
Number 4.
For 12 years, Tina Russell has worked tirelessly to answer one question: what happened to her fun-loving 21-year-old niece on April 9, 2009? Alyssa McLemore was a doting mother of a 3-year-old girl and a loving family caretaker when she suddenly vanished without a single solid clue. Russell believes someone, possibly more than one person, is keeping a secret about Alyssa. "It's time for you to come forward," she said. "It's time to tell the truth and get it off your conscience. I used to say tell us before we die, or one of us dies. But you need to tell us before you die. That's how I feel." On April 9, 2009, Alyssa's family called to tell her that her sick mother, who was suffering from scleroderma and Alyssa helped care for, was taking a hard turn for the worse at the hospital. Alyssa told them she'd be right home. Police say 3 hours later, Alyssa made her last known cell phone call, which ended after 10 seconds. She called 911 and she screamed for help, Russell said. "There is no way anyone can convince me she left on her own." Kent police worked for weeks to find the location of the distress call. They located the Kent cellular tower, but because her BlackBerry was not equipped with GPS, her phone could not be tracked. When someone comes up missing like this, you just never imagine it could be for so long, and to just vanish without a trace, it's unbelievable, said Russell. 3 days after her disappearance, Alyssa's mother died. Through the funeral and beyond, her family hoped she'd come home. Her friends and family held public awareness rallies asking for help, not knowing where to search. Now, national groups raising awareness of thousands of missing Indigenous and Native American women across the country, like Alyssa, are offering help. Her story was featured on CNN on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, and Kent police say the case is open and active. "We're just desperate," said Russell. "We're desperate for answers. And by any and all means, we're going find them." Kent police are asking anyone with any information about Alyssa McLemore to call them anonymously on their tip line at 253-856-5808.
Number 5.
Pease was last seen in Bloomington, Minnesota on March 17, 2009. She has never been heard from again. She had recently moved to Minnesota to get treatment for her addiction and to get away from her former boyfriend, Cedric Joseph Marks. Her mother said she had gotten clean and seemed to be doing well. She was not reported missing for several months. Pease was in a bitter custody dispute Marks at the time of her disappearance. When she failed to show up for court about the custody issue on March 20, 3 days after her disappearance, Marks speculated she had relapsed. He was awarded custody of their 4-year-old son and wasn't considered a suspect in Pease's disappearance at the time. In January 2019, another of Mark's former girlfriends, Jenna Scott, disappeared with her friend Michael Swearingen from Temple, Texas. Scott had gotten a protective order against Marks, saying he had threatened her and her family and had choked her and thrown her out of his car. The order was not made permanent, however. In August 2018, Marks had been charged with burglary after he allegedly broke into Scott's house. Marks was arrested in Michigan on the outstanding burglary charge. A photo of him is posted with this case summary. His current girlfriend, Maya Maxwell, was arrested on the same charge, and his wife, Janelle McDonough, was arrested for harboring a fugitive. She allegedly helped Marks hide from the police. 2 weeks after they vanished, Scott and Swearingen's bodies were found buried in Okfuskee County, Oklahoma. Marks was charged with their murders and extradited to Texas. Authorities began reinvestigating Peace's disappearance in light of the later homicides. One of the people they interviewed was a Belton, Washington woman named Kelly Christine Sorensen, who had been one of Mark's girlfriends. When Sorensen was interviewed in 2019, she admitted she'd helped Marks find Peace in Minnesota after Peace left him in 2009 by calling airlines and shelters across the country and even posing as Peace. She further admitted to playing a role in the abduction of Peace. Sorensen stated she and Marks had traveled to Minnesota and found the women's shelter, where Peace was staying with her son. They parked across the street from the shelter and waited for her. When they saw Peace drive up and get out of her car with her son, Marks punched her and forced her into his vehicle. Sorensen dropped the child at the shelter, then they drove away with Peace. Marks drove south on Interstate 35, and at first Peace screamed and yelled for help, but eventually she fell asleep. At some point, Marks turned onto a gravel road and stopped beside a shack that appeared to be abandoned. This was possibly somewhere in North or South Dakota. Sorensen stated Marks took Peace out of the car, and as she begged for her life he put her in a chokehold and dragged her out of sight behind the shack. Sorensen waited in the car during this time. When Marks returned he was alone and crying, saying he'd murdered Peace and removed her hands and teeth to prevent her body from being identified. Another witness police spoke to about Peace's case was Marks' wife, McDonough. She said Marks had admitted to her that he'd killed Peace so he could get custody of their son. He gave her a CD which he had made for his son to watch when he grew up. The CD contained 2 videos in which Marks spoke to his children and said he was about to go and do something that could either get him locked away for the rest of his life or get him killed. Speaking directly to his and Peace's son, Marks said he was going on a road trip to save the boy's life because Peace had kidnapped him. In March 2020, the 11th anniversary of Peace's disappearance, Marks and Sorensen were charged with second-degree murder in her case. The suspects are awaiting trial. Peace's body has not been recovered, but foul play is suspected due to the circumstances involved.
Number 6.
In the early hours of Tuesday, July 20, 1971, horrified roommates found 24-year-old Rita Patricia Curran lying on the bedroom floor of her ground-level apartment at 17 Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont. The 2 other young women, Beverly Lamphere and Carrie Duane, also shared the quaintly converted Victorian home near the University of Vermont campus. During the school year, Rita taught 2nd grade at nearby Milton Elementary, but that summer she'd begun graduate classes in primary education at the university and worked part-time as a chambermaid at the South Burlington Colonial Motor Inn. The motel was coincidentally located on the same street as the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, where Ted Bundy was born decades earlier. Described as quiet, sweet, and almost painfully shy with a religious Roman Catholic upbringing, the petite brunette schoolteacher was last seen alive at about 11:20 p.m. the previous evening, when Rita had returned home from a choral group rehearsal and was preparing for bed. Her body was discovered around 1 a.m. when Beverly Lamphere returned from a date, partially nude, bloodied, and lying on her back just inside their shared bedroom's door. Rita's hair was in curlers, as if she'd been attacked while preparing for bed. Beverly's boyfriend attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The time of death was later given as approximately midnight. She had been murdered within the 2 hours she was alone, and the killer had already fled, possibly as a result of the roommate's return home. According to the chief medical examiner Lawrence Harris, she was brutally beaten about the head and face by fist, signs of an intense struggle, although her cause of death was ultimately ruled to be manual strangulation. She was sexually assaulted, but not raped. Her torn panties were discovered under her body. Neighbors did not report hearing screams or any other disturbance. Rita's purse, containing about $20, was untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. There were no signs of forced entry, as the girls generally left their apartment unlocked, but bloodstains indicated that the killer left through the kitchen and out the back door. No usable fingerprints were found. According to the Burlington Free Press, Rita Curran had been receiving mysterious phone calls late at night, reportedly heavy breathing and silence, and had related concern about this to her friends. In the days and months following the murder, reports of threatening phone calls to single young women flooded in, and multiple women reported late-night intruders who fled when they screamed. Additional women came forward with reports of a peeping Tom, seen mostly around the university. Detective Lieutenant Richard Beaulieu said his men were checking for a connection between Curran's murder and several assaults on other young women in the Burlington area. A home invasion had occurred only a week earlier, when a 20-year-old woman was awakened at 4 a.m. and raped in her own bed by an assailant she described as 16 to 17 years old. Another home invasion knife attack on a sleeping young woman occurred the previous October, only 3 blocks away from Curran's apartment. The suspect was frightened off when the woman began screaming as he stabbed her and dropped the knife before he fled. It is unclear if the perpetrators of these attacks were ever caught. In September 1971, police announced a major break in the case and said that evidence would be presented to a grand jury, but nothing ever materialized and no grand jury was convened. As it would be reported years later, this major break was probably that police had interrogated and polygraphed a neighbor and considered him a prime suspect after a previous unrelated rape accusation, but there was never enough evidence for an arrest. Reportedly, 3 other suspects were also intensely considered. All males in the Burlington area with a known history of sexual offenses were questioned, and over 100 of Curran's acquaintances were given lie detector tests. Rita's roommates, as well as Beverly Lamphere's boyfriend, were investigated and cleared. The rash of telephone harassment ceased by early September. Not even the offer of a $3,000 reward for information generated any leads. The case quickly went cold. In July 1979, the Burlington Free Press reported that of the 4 major suspects from the early investigation, 2 had already died, and 2 were in prison on murder charges which bore no resemblance to the Curran murder. Mary Curran, Rita's mother, said she believed that there had been a cover-up of some kind. "We felt a lot more could have been done, but wasn't for political reasons." Her mother also stated that Rita had only been living in the apartment for a few weeks and had been planning to move out after an argument with her roommates about a young man spending the night. This was the first time Rita had ever lived independently, and after the argument she had planned on returning to her parents' home in a few days. In researching this case, I spoke to a woman who was a teenager in Burlington at the time of the attack and claimed that her parents were close friends with the Currans. The woman, who wished to remain anonymous, said that Rita was found bound with piano wire, which she had apparently struggled against, as her skin was torn and bloodied. She also said that the police suspected the son of a prominent judge, but did not have enough evidence to charge a high-profile member of the community's son with the crime, and instead his family put him in a mental institution. Ted Bundy's involvement in the Curran murder was first suspected by retired FBI agent John Bassett and reported by Ann Rule in the 1980 edition of The Stranger Beside Me. According to Rule, The Burlington native agent Bassett was intrigued by the remarkable resemblance between Rita Curran and Diane Edwards Bundy's first girlfriend, the fact that Rita had died of strangulation and bludgeoning to the head, and the proximity of the Colonial Motor Inn, where Rita worked, to an institution that had wrought so much emotional trauma in Ted Bundy's life, the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. Rule further speculated that Bundy had visited the Lund home in the summer of 1971, was overcome with rage about his illegitimacy, and killed Rita Curran. She also claimed that municipal dog catcher records showed that a person named Bundy was bitten by a dog that week. However, there are no records whatsoever of Bundy traveling to the East Coast in 1971, and his girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth Klopfer, pen name Kendall, makes no mention of any travel in her 1980 memoir, The Phantom Prince. She describes July of 1971 as the month she moved into a new apartment closer to Bundy's rooming house in Seattle's U District, but she also said that during this time their lives were out of sync and they weren't constantly together. In the summer of 1971, Bundy was attending classes at the University of Washington and employed as a delivery driver for Pedline, a medical supply company. Rita Curran's sister, Mary Curran Campbell, sent a telegram to Florida's death row asking Bundy if he was involved in her death. In a recent interview, Campbell related that the FBI had sent her a response which stated that Bundy refused to confirm or deny the crime. But in the moments before his execution on January 24, 1989, Bundy specifically denied committing any murders in Vermont. Burlington Police Chief Kevin Scully said, "We have looked into the possibility of Ted Bundy's involvement, and we're satisfied that at the time of the Rita Curran murder, Bundy was somewhere else in the country." In 2016, after Rita Curran's siblings published a memorial notice calling for answers, Vermont law enforcement revisited her case. Evidence from the crime scene was tested for DNA, and leads were again investigated. As Bundy's DNA profile was uploaded to the CODIS database in 2011, any DNA from the crime scene should have theoretically shown a match if he was the perpetrator, but as of today, Rita Curran's 1971 murder remains unsolved. Of all the murders ascribed to Ted Bundy, this one seems among the most unlikely to be him. The single coincidence that ties this murder to him, the fact that Rita Curran lived in the same city Bundy was born in and worked near his birthplace, is tenuous at best. According to Seattle police timelines and his ex-girlfriend Liz Klopfer's memoir, as well as his work and school records, Bundy can be placed rather solidly in Seattle in July 1971. However, there are several other issues with the idea that Bundy was involved in Curran's murder. Contrary to what is commonly reported, Rita Curran did not live near the Lund home. She only worked part-time at a motel nearby. Her apartment at 17 Brooks Avenue was located 2 miles away from the Lund home at 346 Shelburne Road. The Colonial Motor Inn, where Rita had finished her shift at 2:30 p.m. on the day of her death, was located at 462 Shelburne Road, not next door to the Lund home as Rule claimed, but half a mile south of it. This means that Anne Rule's hypothesis that Rita was murdered simply because of her proximity to the Lund home doesn't hold much water. Is it possible that on an unrecorded jaunt to Burlington, Bundy saw her working several blocks away from the Lund home, waited until she got off work, followed her to her choir rehearsal, followed her home, watched as her roommates left, then waited until midnight to brutally murder her in the space of less than 2 hours? It's possible. But it's more likely that this was someone she knew personally or someone who lived nearby her apartment. In The Stranger Beside Me, Anne Rule wrote that perhaps Ted had visited Burlington in the summer of 1971 because he had informed her of his illegitimacy that fall when they first met as co-workers at Seattle's crisis clinic. This seems odd, especially since she also speculated a possible stop at the Lund home during his otherwise confirmed travel to the East Coast in the spring of 1969. Police, however, have never confirmed Bundy's presence in Vermont after his birth there in 1946. Even if he had been in Burlington at that time, what would have been the point of this additional trip 2 years later? By then he was well aware of his illegitimacy. According to Klopfer, he had already confessed the secret of his birth circumstances to her early in their relationship, which began in 1969. It seems unlikely that this vague coincidence in the timing of his disclosure to Rule means that Bundy was in Burlington that July. While Bundy did sometimes break into victims' apartments to assault them late at night, in all known cases where he used this modus operandi, he lived in the same neighborhood, within blocks of his targets. The killer stalked nearly all of these women for days, possibly even weeks before striking. In a recent interview with Karen Sparks, the first known surviving victim recalled seeing a man peering through her window late at night only days before her vicious assault. Peeping was an activity Bundy would later admit. In his third-person interviews with the only living witness author Stephen Mitchell, Bundy described how a person would have cased Seattle victim Linda Healy's home for some time before attacking her, learning the layout and which doors were left unlocked at night. Bundy confessed the same behavior to Dr. Dorothy Lewis in Florida on the night before his execution. He told the psychiatrist that he'd been watching surviving Tallahassee victim Cheryl Thomas for several days and had learned her daily routine. Previously, on the day of Thomas's assault, he'd broken into her apartment and left a kitchen window unlocked for easy access later that night. Unlike all of these cases, Bundy didn't live anywhere near Rita Curran and therefore couldn't have been stalking her for any length of time. Nevertheless, when speaking to the Associated Press in January 1989, Rita's sister Mary Curran Campbell said she believed Ted Bundy was responsible and leaned heavily on the idea that Bundy's victims all look the same. When her picture is put alongside the pictures in Ann Rule's book, she just looks like all the other victims. In her book, Ann Rule emphasized the idea that all of Bundy's victims had long brown hair parted in the middle and resembled his first girlfriend, Diane Edwards. She believed Ted's motive was revenge, symbolically killing the former lover who had spurned him by killing her lookalikes. I think this is an incredibly oversimplified and frankly wrong theory on his motivations, which could be a topic for another article in itself. Long hair parted down the middle was a very typical hairstyle in the 1970s, and brown is the most common hair color. Even so, several of Bundy's victims were in fact blondes. The key factor in selecting victims, Bundy later related to his biographers Stephen Mitchell and Hugh Ainsworth, was simply that they be young and attractive. The method of injury used against Rita was also different than Bundy's known MO. During his home invasions, Bundy always waited until his targets were asleep to attack them in their beds, but Rita was still awake and fought back. While Bundy often strangled his victims, he normally did so with a ligature, but Rita was strangled manually. While Bundy often struck his victims in the head with an object such as a crowbar or tire iron, Rita was viciously punched with fists. Bundy also used the element of surprise to quickly bludgeon his victims unconscious, while Rita's assault was an intense struggle. This crime seems to have been committed without the use of any sort of weapon or ligature, only hands and fists, which speaks to its potential impulsivity. Bundy famously used a crowbar to bludgeon and a piece of cord or rope to strangle because his crimes were generally planned. The more impulsive crimes, such as Chi Omega, he used nearby objects as makeshift weapons, but never attacked with his bare hands. While the supposed sexual assault with a crowbar is intriguing, it's only referred to in the 1989 reports speculating about a Bundy connection, not in the contemporary reports at the time of Curran's murder. It's possible the crowbar assault could have been a held-back detail, though unless the weapon was found at the scene it seems impossible to be sure whether the object was indeed a crowbar or some other type of instrument. This may simply be a case of speculation. The weapon was presumed to be a crowbar because Bundy was known to carry a crowbar, conflated with fact Curran was sexually assaulted with an object. The piano wire claim is an oddly specific detail that has never been mentioned in any of the news reports from that era or more recently. Binding victims with piano wire while they were still alive was certainly not a known part of Bundy's modus operandi. The woman I spoke to claimed this detail came directly from the Curran family, but without the case file or the family speaking out, these details cannot be substantiated and may just be rumors. However, it is interesting to note that at least some of this information is corroborated by Rita's mother, who publicly accused the police of a cover-up in 1979. I wasn't able to locate the municipal dog catcher records that Ann Rule claims she saw. Unsurprisingly, animal control records aren't subject to long retention periods. But assuming she somehow did see the record of a dog bite victim named Bundy during in her research nearly a decade after the murder, that surname is relatively common, not exactly a smoking gun. And if Ted Bundy had indeed committed murder in the town, or was planning one, why would he go to the police to report a dog bite? And give his real last name on top of that? Seattle, Washington and Burlington, Vermont are nearly 3,000 miles apart on either side of the North American continent, which equates to 45 hours of non-stop driving. This would have been a major trip even for a well-traveled murderer such as Ted Bundy, and especially for a crime so early in his development as a killer. After researching this case, I am convinced Ted Bundy is not responsible for the murder of Rita Curran. In my opinion, her murderer was most likely the same prowler who had been reported committing acts of voyeurism, threatening phone calls, and rape in the area around that time, but somehow managed to avoid capture, either through self-control, his own death, imprisonment, or the rumored police cover-up. Perhaps the unknown killer entered Rita's apartment intending a sexual assault on a compliant victim, but became murderously violent when she struggled so fiercely against him. Sadly, without DNA evidence, fingerprints, or a confession, after 50 years it seems unlikely that this tragic case will ever be solved. In 2021, Rita's sister Mary said in a statement, "50 years is a long time to grieve, a long time to hope." The 50-year mark confirms that a resolution in our lifetime to Rita's murder is not going to happen. We know Rita's death did not happen in a vacuum. Somebody somewhere knows what happened that night on July 19, 1971, and they will take that information to their grave. May God have mercy on their soul.
Number 7.
Hannibal, Missouri, bills itself as small-town USA. According to WGEM, it holds the Travel Channel title of Missouri's most charming town. The birthplace of literary giant Mark Twain, via the Mark Twain Museum, the town's supposed to be as Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer as it gets. But there's a darker side to the city. According to Crime Grade, those on the east side of the town have a 1 in 17 risk of becoming a crime victim. And no story may better illustrate this point than the disappearance of 21-year-old Christina Whittaker, according to Missing Persons of America. Dig more deeply into this strange case, and you'll quickly realize a few things. Eyewitness accounts contradict each other. Details don't make sense, and local secrets simmer beneath the surface. Trying to sift through these inconsistencies proves bewildering. Why? Because the stories of those most closely involved with Whittaker, aka Tina Young, keep changing. And they don't always add up. Unfortunately, the young mother remains gone after vanishing without a trace on November 13, 2009, via KHQA. Some would say her case has gone cold. But again, there's more to this true crime tale than meets the eye. From whispers of domestic violence to human trafficking, more happened that night than many people prove willing to let on. While some may wish to see these secrets remain buried, others desperately want closure for the Whittaker case more than a decade later. On that fateful Friday, November 13, 2009, Christina Whittaker was last seen outside of a couple of sports bars in Hannibal, Missouri. The night began at Rookies, located at 611 Broadway, on the east side of town. Some accounts say she initially met her friends at the bar, as reported by the Las Vegas World News. According to My True Crime Stories, it marked the young mother's first night out since having her baby. But things took a dramatic turn for the worse at roughly 11:45 p.m. According to some accounts, Whittaker got rowdy after drinking too much, via Charlie Project. So, the bartender kicked her out. Inexplicably, her friends refused to leave with her. Whittaker found herself inebriated and alone on a cold November night. Whittaker's mother, Cindy Young, claims her daughter begged the bartender to speak to her friends, still inside the bar, and let them know she needed a ride home. How Young, who was out of town at the time, via the Steve Wilkos show, came by this information, she hasn't explained. That said, it's a small town, and rumors have a way of traveling quickly. Despite her pleas, Whittaker's friends still refused to leave. Her friend, Brianna, would later claim on the Steve Wilkos show that she didn't go outside to offer Whittaker a ride because she didn't need to go to jail. After exiting Rookies, Christina Whittaker headed next door to the Sportsman's Bar and then River City Billiards, according to Jerry Dean of Missing Persons of America. She begged people for a ride along the way. Both acquaintances and strangers refused her, a strange indictment on America's hometown, as people often bill Hannibal. Of course, hindsight proves 20/20ths, as they say. And there's no way to gauge how Whittaker behaved that night apart from eyewitness testimony. That said, fathoming the unwillingness to help a local girl in a town of nearly 17,500 also requires a stretch of the imagination. Especially since she started the evening in the company of friends. This detail represents just one of many that has people scratching their heads. What happened next? Unable to secure a way home, eyewitnesses last saw Whittaker sobbing and running out the back entrance of Sportsman's, via My True Crime Stories. No one has seen her in Hannibal since. Later, authorities recovered her phone a few yards from Sportsman's, in front of an apartment complex on the 200 block of 7th Street near Church Street. Although Whittaker's frantic flight took place in a commercial area with multiple bars, no surveillance video from that night has emerged. Christina Whittaker didn't have proper clothing to ward off the cold of a November night. As reported by the Charlie Project, people last saw her wearing jeans, a pink tank top, a white half-sleeve shirt, and white and pink Nikes. She stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed between 120 and 130 pounds. She had brown eyes, red hair, and a variety of distinctive scars and tattoos, including a Care Bear with a marijuana leaf on her ankle and a large angel with a raised middle finger on her back. She lived with her mother in the Oakwood neighborhood, roughly a 6-minute drive from Rookies and a 52-minute walk via Google Maps. Recently, she'd been arrested for driving with a revoked license. Due to her disappearance, she missed a court date on December 18, 2009, and now has a warrant out for her arrest. My True Crime Stories notes that Whittaker suffered from fibromyalgia, anxiety attacks, and bipolar disorder for which she took daily medication. Could the meds she took have interacted badly with alcohol? According to drugs.com, interactions between bipolar medications and alcohol can prove incredibly dangerous. After all, bipolar medications impact specific chemicals in the central nervous system, resulting in memory loss, dizziness, increased risks of falling, and confusion. What's more, Very Well Mind reports that drinking and consuming bipolar meds impairs your judgment and makes you more impulsive and increases the risk of suicide, injury, hospitalization, and sexually transmitted infections. Later, more pieces would get added to the puzzle. The Las Vegas World News reports that Christina Whittaker's then-boyfriend, Travis Blackwell, received a call from Whittaker at 10:30 p.m. to check in with him. Blackwell stayed at Cindy Young's house that night to babysit Whittaker's 6-month-old baby girl, Alexandria, in Whittaker's absence. Whittaker told Blackwell she had a ride home and would return around midnight after stopping at a restaurant to pick up food for him. Whittaker never showed up. The following day, Blackwell notified Young that her daughter never returned home. He stayed with the baby until he could find a family member to watch her. Young waited until Sunday to file a missing person report. Again, dissonance surrounds the details. As Chelly Servan, writing for the Las Vegas World News, observes, a 21-year-old girl who is the mother of a 6-month-old baby and who allegedly either speaks to or sees her mother daily just ups and disappears, but she wasn't reported missing right away can, I'll admit, seem strange. Whittaker also missed taking her meds, which meant further cause for alarm. Why didn't police learn of her disappearance sooner? Servan hypothesizes that Whittaker may have disappeared more often than the family let on. But Young told Steve Wilkos that Whittaker had never been gone for more than 2 days in her entire life. Cindy Young described her daughter as mentally fragile, naive, and prone to childlike behavior, as reported by True Case Files. In an interview with KHQA, she said Christina Whittaker might also suffer from depression exacerbated by postpartum depression. This characterization of Whittaker's genuine vulnerabilities only serves to underscore her potential for endangerment. According to Las Vegas World News, it also sheds a harsh light on Whittaker's friends and family, raising questions about why they waited so long to contact the police. Why no alarm by Saturday night when the mentally fragile woman hadn't shown up? Why no next day calls from the friends out with her that night? As for Travis Blackwell, why didn't he wait up for the takeout Whittaker promised him? Perhaps these details could be explained away, but they feel inconsistent. The Hannibal Police Department played devil's advocate, claiming neither Young nor Blackwell acted outside of the norm. According to Captain Jim Hark, it's not uncommon to have a person gone for a day or two, but after that, we start taking a hard look at what is going on. Nevertheless, even the casual onlooker realizes holes exist in the stories spun by Young and Blackwell in the hours and days following Whittaker's vanishing. 82 days after Christina's disappearance, Steve Wilkos invited her family and friends to appear on an episode of his show titled, Did You Kill Christina? Many previously undisclosed details surfaced. Cindy Young accused Travis Blackwell of showing no concern or emotion following Christina Whittaker's disappearance. She also stated that the 10:30 p.m. call between he and Whittaker likely involved a heated argument. Young also claimed her caller ID showed Whittaker had telephoned again and that other family members in the house heard the phone ring. But she said Blackwell refused to answer. According to a later interview, Young said the other family members at the house included Whittaker's brother and his girlfriend. Why they didn't pick up the phone remains unexplained. Whittaker's friend, Brianna, corroborated the phone call fight in her interview with Steve Wilkos. She said Whittaker got removed from Rookies for yelling over the phone. She also claimed a history of extreme domestic violence existed between the two. The show culminated with the results of Blackwell's 2 failed lie detector tests regarding Whittaker's disappearance. It looked like a slam dunk case until Young rescinded everything. In a Herald Whig interview published after the February 2010 airing of the show, she said Blackwell would never hurt her daughter. She also claimed he had passed a lie detector test through the Hannibal Police Department. Young even used the presence of her son and his girlfriend at the house that night as an alibi for Blackwell. Young's contradictory testimony proved mind-boggling to viewers of the show. It also begged the question, was anyone telling the truth? If Travis Blackwell wasn't involved in Christina Whittaker's disappearance, then what happened to her? As days stretched into weeks, Cindy Young's concerns grew that her daughter had fallen prey to a predator. According to My True Crime Stories, within 2 weeks of Whittaker's disappearance, an informant gave the Hannibal Police Department its first solid lead. The informant claimed a group of men dealing in sex work and drugs had trafficked Whittaker to Peoria, Illinois, where she worked in the sex trade. So, Young started spending time in Peoria, questioning locals about her daughter's whereabouts, and a private investigator also scoured the city via KHQA. According to KHQA, Officer Doug Burgess of the Peoria Police Department stated, "We do have prostitution and drug activity. As far as human trafficking, we don't see it all that much. I've never seen it in my career here." In an expose of human trafficking published in Peoria magazines in May 2018, Carol Myrna presents a different picture. Millions of women, men and children around the world, including here in central Illinois, are modern-day slaves. We have seen with certainty that the inhumane practice of human trafficking is prosperous in Peoria, Tazewell, and Woodford counties. According to Myrna, 15% of human trafficking victims in central Illinois come from out of state, not counting foreign-born individuals. There have been reported sightings of Christina Whittaker in Peoria, Illinois, adding fuel to the speculation about her vanishing. The Las Vegas World News reports a waitress named Beth Taylor, who worked at Tredean's Country Cafe in Creve Coeur, she saw Whittaker just days after the young mother's initial disappearance, stating, "It was definitely her. I'm 110% sure." As reported by My True Crime Stories, a Peoria Police Department (PPD) officer reported seeing her too. A woman said she even spent time with Whittaker in a local mental hospital where the traumatized, missing girl related details about her life as a forced sex worker. Yet, according to PPD's officer Doug Burgess in a 2012 interview with KHQA, we don't have any confirmation that she's in the area. Burgess did discuss the possible police sighting. According to Burgess, a female looking similar to Whittaker ran from a PPD narcotics officer after he made initial contact with her. As a result, the officer couldn't confirm her identity. The official narrative from the PPD has evolved over the years. On November 21, 2018, the PPD posted a Crime Stoppers video about Whittaker's disappearance via its Facebook page. In the video, Detective Cheryl Stinson spoke briefly about confirmed sightings in Peoria over the years, offering a $1,000 reward to anyone with information leading to her location. After vanishing with few traces, Christina Whittaker left behind Alexandria, her mother Cindy Young, and hundreds of unanswered questions, according to Missing Persons of America. On the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, KHQA ran a story revisiting the case. Reporter Raja Maples interviewed Whittaker's mother and 2 officers from the Hannibal Police Department, HPD, Lieutenant Jennifer Grote and Lieutenant Jacob Knack. Grote has handled the case from day one. She says HPD has interviewed more than 200 people in connection with the investigation, including individuals incarcerated for other crimes. She notes the family has their DNA registered through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, a nationwide database where unidentified remains get matched with missing persons. About 2 months into the initial investigation, the FBI even stepped in. Grote remarked, "They said we had done more than what they would have done in some instances. Because some of the leads that we follow up on are things like with psychics and just very strange and odd tips. The collaborations wouldn't end there. More than 45 different agencies weighed in on the case. HPD also conducted a dig in autumn of 2018, but no evidence or human remains turned up. But human trafficking isn't the only theory people have about this case. Users on Reddit have theorized Whittaker could have drowned. There's a significant geographic detail often overlooked in articles about Christina Whittaker, the location of the bars in question. Whittaker vanished half a mile from the Mississippi River. Broadway, the street Rookies bar sits on, dead ends at boat slips. Google Maps reports the average pedestrian could make the trek from Rookies to the Mississippi River's banks in just 9 minutes. Turning right or left could result in falling off a ledge into the river, especially when drunk and disoriented. Currents in the river prove powerful, making swimming to safety nearly impossible. The river also represents an ideal location for those considering suicide or homicide, as reported by Twin Cities. When bodies end up in the water, accidentally or intentionally, fast-moving currents wash them hundreds of miles or more downstream. Others in the thread also note the rural nature of Hannibal's setting. Had Whittaker tried to walk home through the woods, hypothermia might have set in. Almanac reports that on November 13, 2009, Hannibal experienced a low of 39.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that cold enough to kill someone? Live Science reports that between 30 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, body temperatures can drop dangerously low. Factors like sweating and inebriation speed up the process. According to the article Alcohol and Cold by researcher P.O. Granberg, alcohol is a dominant cause in urban hypothermia. Nature remains the wild card in all of this. 8 years after her daughter's disappearance, Cindy Young stated that Christina Whittaker is alive and most likely the victim of human trafficking, as reported by Hannibal's Courier Post. In an interview with Theta Person for Christian Ferguson Looking for an Angel in January 2021, Young discussed the trafficking narrative, disclosing new details based on alleged street interviews in Peoria. With so many twists and turns in this case, it would be easy to assume the disappearance of Whittaker will remain unsolved. But a 6-part true crime series by Christina Fontana called Relentless promises to shed new light on the case. According to Cord Cutters News, Fontana spent more than 11 years investigating the case. She collected in excess of 400 hours of footage from video diaries and field investigations, and Fontana promises viewers explosive revelations. What can you expect from the show? According to MSN, everything from police corruption to human trafficking, organized crime to very deep, very dark family secrets.